This is Am I Human, where we discuss how much artificial intelligence should be integrated in our lives. In this episode, we will discuss the future of artificial intelligence in the human working world. Will it be the pinnacle of our economy or a logistical nightmare? And will the ethical concern that comes with it become a problem beyond our control? Brain the bat scenario, are you guys familiar with that?
Sort of like the entire premise of the Matrix, where we live in a simulation, right?
Yeah, pretty much. The premise is that our brains are literally sitting in a vat connected to some sort of AI supercomputer that simulates our brains in a way to how we perceive the actual world.
If there's you wondering whether or not the scenario could be true, rest assured it's a skeptical argument that's been proven to be logically incoherent by a lot of philosophers, but it really does make you wonder, will AI ever be powerful enough that it essentially passes our limits of intelligence, and more importantly, are we prepared to embrace the future like that?
AI has really garnered itself as its own topic in the media, basically as mainstream as the business, sports, or op-ed sections of the news. And this isn't new for us either. It's pretty much commonplace, at least the physical manifestation of it.
But I think that the part of AI that isn't as well known, at least in the public eye, is what goes on behind the scenes. A lot of this is such an unknown topic that the general public can barely start to understand these things.
Exactly, yeah. I'm reading some headlines from the past few weeks. Economists pin more blame on tech for rising inequality. Recent research underlines the central role that automation has played in widening disparities. This is from the New York Times. Another one from the Wall Street Journal. The world that AI might create. Artificial intelligence will have a profound impact on our jobs, our health, and possibly our very existence, but that's where the consensus ends. Notice that both these headlines, among lots of others, are less about the tasks that AI is performing. We've seen the miracles AI can do, but now we're sort of seeing some of the collateral impacts it has. I think before even touching upon the impact AI has, I think it might be worth discussing how we define artificial intelligence. From a philosophical standpoint, intelligence is the ability to understand and comprehend internal and external reality. In psychology, it can be defined as a cognitive ability that can be measured, whether it be by some quota or results of a test.
In the case for artificial intelligence, we'll probably use the philosophical definition since that's what AI is more akin to. We can generally define AI as the use of computers to simulate human intelligence behaviors like learning and judgment.
Colloquially, AI is sometimes misdefined as just a machine that performs one or more tasks. In actuality, it's more like a virtual assistant, like Apple's Siri or Amazon's Alexa, that can learn and create recommendations based on your habits, what you search on the internet, etc.
Exactly, and that kind of brings me to my next point, autonomy, or independence for AI. AI obviously still requires initial human input, which is in the form of programming. However, when we refer to AI performing specific tasks, that being AI in the human working world for this episode, how much are we willing to allow AI to do these tasks by itself? There's a hypothetical example brought up in an essay about this type of ambiguity. So let's say that an autonomous vehicle exists, a self-driving car, and it drives people places, and a person wants it to drive them to the beach. Would it be autonomous to drive to the beach that has been inputted, or instead drive them to a swimming pool as an alternative, because the AI detected that the beach was very crowded?
I think what I gathered from that scenario is that when we designate a task that has a lot of decision facts like driving or performing a job function, it's important to draw a line between the ambiguities and could cause ethical concerns down the line.
Exactly, and while this type of hypothetical may be somewhat of a drawn-out scenario, not totally related to the impact on jobs, it's equally integral to consider when programming AI and the way it improves itself, since that is what AI is supposed to do, improve its tasks given an external input or stimuli.
I think one absolutely vital part of this distinction is defining the term agent in a philosophical context and in a cognitive sense. In The Ethics of AI by Powers and Ganassia, it's important to understand that from a standpoint of philosophy, an agent intends, upon reflection, its actions. This is much different from the agent that we encounter when we want our computer to start up Google. or a GPS to identify the closest route to an intended destination. This kind of agent, from a cognitive scientific stance, implements a function that maps percept sequences to actions.
I see. So pretty much the capacity to act or complete a specific action in a given environment.
Precisely. To put it into perspective, this is very similar to the ubiquitous computer program that opens up your email or notepad application when you tell it to do so, or if A, then B in a broader sense. This conceptual ambiguity around the nature of AI is a large part of why many are skeptical about incorporating it into more jobs. The humans who control and manipulate the AI to achieve their own ends fit into the category of agents in a more philosophical sense, in that they are able to reflect and have direct intention for their actions, such as collecting your data and selling it to the highest bidder.
So I guess what we have now is sort of three philosophical components when we're defining AI: be intelligence, autonomy, and agency. For the purpose of this discussion, we'll think of AI as an intelligent program that can learn from a stimuli and the ability to create an action from that, while remaining more or less dependent on some human input.
And sort of on the other side of the spectrum, you have something like machine learning. Machine learning is another aspect of AI which involves extremely little human input. It basically just tells the computer what is good, what is bad, as well as the rules surrounding a decision, then lets the computer run its course over and over to find an optimal solution. This is actually extremely common in sort of chess-based artificial intelligence computers.
What comes to mind when we think of the presence of AI in jobs when being replaced? I mean, we're seeing stuff like this pop up in large urban settings like New York City. Amazon opened some of its first New York City stores 2-3 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I think it's May 2019.
Yeah, and what was most shocking about that? No cashiers. Really no employees at all, at least in the front of the store managing the customers. Just scan your phone at the entrance, pick up what you need, and walk out. Simple as that. Your purchases are charged to your account automatically. So we see that Amazon was able to successfully operate a store with fewer employees than a conventional grocery store. We have the available technology for AI to replace work, should we? And is there sort of an ethical code we should follow when determining which jobs are being replaced?
I think that certain jobs could and definitely should be replaced through AI technology. Database jobs, let's say, like accounting or some parts of banking, play into the strengths of available AI technology and could definitely greatly improve the efficiency of these sectors. And the areas that should remain free of AI technology should probably be those that require more complicated processes that cannot be quantified, like law or medicine.
Exactly, and to go off that, AI is really the next big step in the working world. We could think of it like the American Industrial Revolution as the former, and artificial intelligence as the latter. Research indicates that a lot of experts believe this will totally redefine the meaning of work, replacing the jobs that provide the bare necessities to live, like management of electricity or water to keep a house running, should be automated. Ethically speaking, there are always going to be some trade-offs. I mean, it's inevitable that there will be an initial job shortage, but thinking long-term leaves more room for jobs that require thinking outside of the box and reaching a common good through other avenues of work. And by common good, I mean that we could improve our aspects of our lives and society as a whole through this type of job reallocation. AI taking over these basics leaves room for other ways to reach this and force a social reconstruction as we move away from this type of work.
Yeah, actually, in one podcast with Lex Friedman, I remember Elon Musk talking about this topic and the sort of social upheaval and saying that AI will likely take over so many jobs that it will be necessary for, a universally income stream to put in place for those who can't find jobs. And this concept definitely seems to resonate with many experts from the Pew Research Center who believe the number of implementations of AI is unlimited, meaning that it will take over nearly all of the sectors of our current economy.
In my opinion, there's always going to be jobs that AI will never replace. As Aidan mentioned early, the work of artists and musicians who utilize the human trait of creativity in their work can't necessarily be replaced by AI. This sentiment is echoed in a Pew Research survey by Jerry Michalski, founder of REX, who believes that these areas of employment, in addition to relationship-based occupations, are likely to be the only groups to remain unaffected by the rising tide of AI.
Research also pointed out that AI will will inevitably become a large part of the economy by 2025. However, many think it will expand beyond just the sectors mentioned above. One expert expects AI to expand beyond these sectors and even become part of the medical field and possibly replace our romantic partners. This last theory may incite fear and worry for some when thinking about the future of AI. Personally, I think that there should be a division between our social interactions and AI, and I know many others think so.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. We hear a lot of fictitious scenarios where AI goes beyond the workplace and kind of creeps into our lives, but in a realistic sense, and to go back to your point earlier, AI is likely to only be used for economic efficiency that it provides.
That is true, and I definitely hope that that stays the case, but that type of thought does create an interesting dilemma between what we think should happen and what will happen. The developers of AI technologies are not constantly polling the population to decide whether they should continue with their work, meaning that it doesn't really matter whether or not the public agrees with what is happening, because the innovation will occur with or without our approval.
One other important point to bring up about this survey is to take into account the biased nature of the survey, as many of these experts in technology hold positions that might provide monetary benefit along with the advancement of AI, such as company founders, CEOs, and other executive researchers. In addition, this survey is not a random representative sample, but is instead using an opt-in system, which means that those whose opinions are shown in the survey might be biased because they have been invited to participate by the publishers themselves and bear the qualities of opinions that the publishers have favored in the past. This survey does not contain the opinions of those most likely to be affected by the foreseen displacement of flesh workers, such as blue and white-collar workers whose jobs are most vulnerable to automation.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely an important factor to consider when reviewing the results of this research. A lot of experts believe AI will be integrated into nearly every aspect of our lives, even as soon as 2025. While this is somewhat of a big thing, it's also a little bit underwhelming, however, since I think most people just aren't aware that AI has already creeped up in a lot of aspects of our lives. You have laptops, phones, tablets, all of us which we use on a daily basis, and year by year get more technologically advanced. You see that a lot of people on here have these high administrative positions. It's obviously a lot easier to speak from their position since it's unlikely their jobs will become automated. But do you think that a step in this direction, at least at the expense of some blue and white collar jobs, will benefit society in the future and balance that sort of class divide?
Overall, I think AI might be a step forward for those benefited by the elimination of available human jobs, such as company holders and other administrative positions as work output is streamlined. But it is a step backward for the flesh and blood workers and their families, who will likely be outclassed by tireless automatons as the level of competition to secure jobs is raised. As a result, work unions will fission as the need for strikebreakers is eliminated by a mechanical workforce, which does not demand a raise in salary during recessions, requiring only a power source and an engineer in the event of malfunction.
So to sort of continue with the discussion we were having, that last sort of point of contention was the potential trade-offs that come with the introduction of AI into our jobs. AI will first create a fast, more efficient future, but is this the more important than the effect of the people whose jobs AI just replaced? Do the benefits really outweigh the costs, and is this the ethical solution to a more efficient future?
Speaking of inefficiency, you have the potential to greatly improve people's lives and make everyone's lives exponentially more productive and easier. So there's no doubt that there's a huge upside to developing AI machinery, and I believe that as AI becomes more common, it will increase the number of jobs and the number of scholars actually seem to agree.
Yeah, continue from your point, a lot of economists also think that AI, at least in the foreseeable future, will be less of a takeover, but more of a subtle supplement. Think of AI in the working place like tipping a scale. While AI is likely to replace relatively mundane tasks, it will equally tip the scale to equilibrium by creating new jobs, likely in the technology field and in regards to AI regulation. In some sense, it could free up resources and valuable assets and divert such skills down a more impactful pursuit.
Along with the elimination of white and blue-collar jobs such as construction and data entry among human workers, There will also be a massive increase in the demand for programmers to enter into the workforce with the rise of AI in new positions. This change will ultimately lead to a decrease in manual hard labor to an increase in IT technology jobs that require schooling and knowledge about the software. This move from a physical workforce to a technological one will require major changes in the education system to promote access to knowledge about programming and engineering to allow widespread access to these jobs.
Exactly, and we saw a very similar phenomenon happen during the Industrial Revolution when machines became much more prominent in manufacturing of goods, but this also led to lots of jobs being created to fix and modify these machines and make better machines. I also think that you can apply this argument to lots of things, but it seems counterproductive when you look at these other examples. So, for example, in the case of planes, you could instead of flying, you drive somewhere and you'd be spending more money on gas and on hotel rooms, which employ people and keep places in business. It would be very difficult to make the same argument that we should all drive everywhere so that people who work in sectors that are reliant on driving keep their jobs. And an article from the Wall Street Journal suggests that the cost of AI will ultimately surpass the benefits and will seriously impact people's jobs in the near future.
At this point, we've made a nice segue into our concluding point. The rise of AI may open new doors in the technology sector, but there must also be new doors and opportunities to educate the workforce of the next generation, alongside the huge demand expected to be birthed from new developments in AI, such as decreased costs of schooling and wider access to public education. This huge change in the job market is only worth the losses if we can deliver the tools to allow a new generation of individuals to find work in a technologically advanced workforce.
In essence, there's definitely more to be done on our part before we let AI do it for us. Logistical allocations of the education and tools needed for this integration, as Carla mentioned, is a must-have in order to not widen the disparity that current AI job replacement has created thus far. Looking long-term, the implementation of AI will generally be to our advantage and serve as advancements in our policymaking. The initial integration will definitely cause some ethical upheaval, like we mentioned. However, I think once we get to that point, we must look at how it will be an overall betterment for us and to a more advanced, efficient future.